Hi, welcome to Project Geospatial. I'm Adam Simmons. Here at the Geospatial Frontier Virtual Technology Fair is Chris Rasmussen. So Chris is from NGA, and he's got a long history working unclassified initiatives and bringing the government in the unclassified spaces over, well, not just years, but over a decade now. Is that correct, Chris?
Yeah. Yes.
So if you want to give a brief introduction to what you've been up to lately and how everything that's been going on has impacted what you've been doing or actually supporting your initiatives.
Sure. I've been in the unclassified space, open source research, open source software on the public facing side for 10 plus years. And the big flagship thing that I wanted to talk about was something called GEOINT Pathfinder and what that did for NGA and some lessons learned from other agencies. And then my time spent with Intelink, helping launch Intellipedia and some other kind of collaborative tools. And some of those lessons learned of over time of what I think it's going to take to make these post-COVID lessons really stick and be a core part of operations, not necessarily business continuity or supplemental activity to get there. So the real structural reforms. GEOINT Pathfinder was a proposal in 2014 when the Director of National Intelligence was looking at the very aggressive small satellite launch schedule and what that meant to NGA's value proposition when theoretically somebody can buy a change detection service for $45. Now, space is hard. A lot of the predictions at that time have not been fulfilled, but still it was good to jostle loose the value proposition argument with such commercialization of GEOINT. The recommendation from the D&I and the study group was to form a separate entity, a completely 100% unclassified entity that did everything unclassified, all unclassified tools, IT, everything, to drive out recommendations from the commercial of GEOINT perspective that the agency would need to make to maintain relevance in the small satellite and a very aggressive small satellite commercialized GEOINT world. The Pathfinders ran from 2015 to 2017. There was two of them. The first one ran for about 3 or 4 months. The next one for about 9 to 10 months. There was about 30 to 40 analysts that were scattered across the globe. Everyone was teleworking. We had all of the Commonwealth allies present, as well as the Army and the Marine Corps. In that activity. There was a special room that was de-skiffed within the headquarters of NGA where just commercial Wi-Fi was used. Special passes were made to bring in your own gear, your own phones, the whole thing. So that was a teleworked analytic unit that ran very, very successfully. The recommendations that were given, I'll give you a couple of the impacts that are being dusted off now for this the COVID situation that we were in. One of the things that culturally that we had to kind of mitigate was the belief that an intelligence agency's interest in almost any topic is inherently sensitive. So Pathfinder made very common sense rules for how to do open research, what to protect. So some of the very rule of thumb questions that came out of Pathfinder, there had been jokes about in the hallways of the intelligence community about this for a long time. Like, of course we're interested in that. That's not a secret. But it hadn't really been codified and done like it was with Pathfinder. And one of the questions two questions are asked, two core questions is, does the group under study actively hide their activity? Yes or no? Go to the next question. If they knew that we were studying it, would they change their behavior? If the answer to the first question is no, and the second question is no, in many cases you can work it safely publicly. Now, there's behind the firewall on the unclassified side, but let me give you an example. Do the North Koreans actively hide apartment construction and modernization in capital cities? No. Would they change their behavior knowing that we are studying it from overhead? No. They will not apply denial and deception techniques to an economic activity because that would be a disaster. So it's a common sense question. You can run other things through it. That if the answer is no and no, you have a safety. If the answers are yes, then you have to ask a couple more questions about whether that's safe or not. And it's not just economic questions or humanitarian disaster response. You can even run military activity through it. For example, do the Russians actively hide their construction and activity in the Arctic region? No, they did not. They put it in the paper. And in fact, they invite journalists and they have virtual tours where you can go on a website and go through some of the bases that they're constructing on the ground. Would they change their behavior knowing what we're watching? No, they telegraph that clearly. And they put the progress often in those websites and telegraph that. So it's not just economic and humanitarian disaster are good for unclassified. You can even do certain military matters and do it smartly. And Pathfinder was really good at driving that out, and that had a lot of impact on the classification rewrite that the entire NGA did, called the Consolidated NGA Guide, called the Conga. And those very common sense rules were in there. And a lot of folks remember those. I do a lot of tutorials with analysts and step them through very practical examples. And when you use those things that people remember stories and simple things like that, not necessarily 200 pages of regulations. So that's been very, very helpful. Just time spent in the unclassified space is knowing where that line is. And it's kind of like learning a language. You got to jump in and be in there. You really get a good sense of what is worth protecting, what is state of the art, what is the total percentage change over common academic and common commercial practices, what is truly worth protecting. So fusing together commercial imagery and social media and supply chain data is done every day by hedge fund groups and by other researchers. So you have to ask yourself, what are we really protecting? And that's what Pathfinder really, really helped with, are those kind of activities. So when COVID happened, myself and a lot of the Pathfinder alumni were in these chat tools all day long, answering questions almost 10 hours a day. In the initial start of COVID, hey, I heard you guys did this. What do you think? I'm trying to do this. What do you think of this? So that team, those alumni, were very, very helpful to the organization in those collaborative technologies around in the March timeframe when the first stay-at-home orders were cut, to help the organization out with getting good and getting comfortable at this. And I think that NGA kind of has a lead here because of the commercialization of the business. There's been quite a bit of thought there because of activities like Pathfinder that took place that formed a precedent. Often in government, it's people want to take the book right off the shelf and say, who's done this before? So that really, really helped. And I think NGA, of where they are, and the activity that is happening, I looking across the other organizations, I do think NGA is kind of a leader in this space. There's more work to do, and I'll get to what I believe those are, because I've seen part of this movie before. Once with launching Intellipedia, and I'll get to that, and then with Pathfinder, what happened after Pathfinder. So I've seen parts of the movie before, and I think with the best intentions, people are saying that we're gonna keep doing this, and this is gonna be business as usual. I'm fairly skeptical, based upon my experience, and I believe that certain conditions need to be in place for it to really stick and be seen as core flagship work moving forward. So I'll just stop there, and before I go into the next parts, and if you have any questions.
Well, I'm sure this is what you're about to get into, but I am interested in hearing how your best practices has been brought in or adopted by other organizations beyond just NGA, and not just other DoD organizations, but I actually, as the military has been forced to rethink a lot of these things as well, how much have they come to you or come to NGA and saying, hey, we're watching this program, let's adopt this,
Yeah, the lessons learned and the contacts have been pretty broad. So I've done video conferences like this with Special Operations Command. I've done them with the Treasury Department. I've done them with elements of DIA. So it's not just NGA. So that they are applicable across, not just necessarily the commercialization of GEOINT perspective that gives NGA kind of an advantage. And in my opinion, all the three letters will go through the open sourceization, if you will, of intelligence and be in kind of the what are we going to do value proposition wise, like NGA is. It's just NGA's int, if you will, if you look at it from that perspective, has been commercialized the hardest and the fastest. That has brought about a desire and a need to really rethink business. I think all of the three letters will go through this, but NGA is kind of first. So to answer your question, yes, it's very broad. A lot of the tools that we're in, the IntelLink suite, for example, on the Unclassified fabric, where Unclassified Intellipedia, Unclassified chat tools, Unclassified kind of Twitter capability, blogging capability, those numbers just spiked through the roof. To be honest, in 2008, it was a ghost town on the Unclassified side. There was about fewer than 100 users talking to each other about the virtues of open source and unclassified collaboration.
I may have been one of those individuals back then.
Yeah, and it was. I'll talk about that when I get to the Intellipedia part and my time with that project. But yes, there was the metrics in some of these tools were fewer than 20 users in some case. In the chat tools, they were in the hundreds. Now they're in the thousands and tens of thousands. But it gives you a sense of what the unclassified space was in that collaborative infrastructure prior to COVID. So it was a challenge keeping people in that space. But yes, it's not just NJ and those IntelLink tools. So those IntelLink tools are available to anyone with a CAC or PIV card. So that's the State Department, every military branch, so they can see a lot of this activity that's happening in those collaborative tools. And from that, and then, just other kinds of communication and reputation and reading the Pathfinder lessons learned that are posted there. That's how others outside of NJ have reached out and have read them and come forth with more questions on how to do it.
How much of the current circumstances do you think will push a bigger portion of the workforce into a more permanent stance of working in the unclassified realm?
Yeah, so this is where the lessons learned from my time with helping launch Intellipedia and this other idea called the Living Intelligence System. And your audience can look for the videos called Toward Living Intelligence and the Living Intelligence System. There's 2 YouTube videos that explain this. In 2006 to 2009, I helped launch and grow Intellipedia on the high side mostly, the wiki for the intelligence community. And that's pretty pedestrian sounding now to have a wiki behind a corporate firewall in 2020. But I can assure you installing one was very radical in the intelligence community in 2005. Before that, you had email, official product, message traffic, and maybe some sort of Lotus Notes open collaborative system. The idea that anyone can contribute with version control to an article was pretty radical.
But you also had I'll even add that you even had a lack of individual organizational websites out there. Yeah. And that was a huge impact as well. So even beyond a wiki, that's just scratching that's the tip of the iceberg of what it became.
Correct. And a lot of the usage was, there wasn't a lot of the pages and the usage was, there wasn't a good place to have just simple websites to describe what your unit was doing at that time. Now, my view of Intellipedia is I always wanted to get to the official voice. I saw that a lot of content was being generated, a lot of valuable reference material, a lot of people were using it as their unit's website. But where I believed it needed to go was to be the living official version. In 2006, a national intelligence estimate was attempted to be drafted in Intellipedia. And your audience can Google NIE, Nigeria, Intellipedia. And there's lessons learned. I believe Time reported on this. And Dr. Tom Fingar, the head of analytic output at the time, I forgot the title he had, can explain this. And the lesson learned from me from that case, and then looking at all of the content that was forming in Intellipedia, this kind of binary was forming, that the content was good for collaboration, but not the product. And in that national intelligence estimate, it failed. So the agencies would not contribute together in that wiki, and the traditional process won out. So what that showed me is, for a lesson learned from a technology perspective, is that you have to do the new thing in the new system. If you have something that is perceived as inherently better or more prestigious, and these other things are lesser, you have that dichotomy. So from that lesson learned, I noted kind of the why can't the wiki be official? And I designed this system called Living Intelligence that tried to put agency authoritative logos on things and kind of balance version control to make official product. That was a couple of organizations got in there. It was fairly successful in the beginning, but fizzled again because the flagship, or where real work is done, was not perceived as in these systems. So fast forward to today and how this will stick based upon those lessons learned. In my opinion, again, this is the world according to Chris Rasmussen, and these are my views, that if we do not do official and flagship output on the unclassified side, I believe that dynamic will form again. If the perception that real work happens on the classified side and the unclassified side is viewed as an eternal supplement and is not viewed as a co-equal environment where real work is done, I believe that the lessons learned will not inherently stick. So if we do, or any organization that does, official, authoritative, flagship output, whatever they do, that is their flagship stuff, if that is done on the unclassified side, I believe that heavy, meaty mission will drive the users there and the customers there, and it will stick. In the long term, there are declarations that folks are going to continue 3 days a week and things like that, and I think that's fantastic. But based upon my experience with the good for collaboration, not the product, I think that if the unclassified side is not viewed as co-equal, or where real work can be done, I think that it will. I think in the long term it will not stick.
Now that makes a lot of sense, and that's just not. That's not the case just for unclassified Intel Link or the unclassified environment overall. That's the case with any organization commercially as well, trying to transition operations to a new product line or a new business line. So this applies to a world of other activities as lessons learned, trying to promote adoption and engagement for any new product.
Yes, it's not just narrow cast to this specific case. If you draw it out from digital modernization that organizations attempt, if they don't do it or do core activities within those new systems or new processes, you just have additional work. And that's been borne out by a lot of digital modernization kind of postmortems where there's similar type of lessons learned. So that's my opinion on the long term. I have another idea to make it stick, and I can talk about that a little bit more, but wanted to take any other questions that you had.
Yeah, so the one thing that I think kind of resonates with me is what you just said, is how many do you feel like there is certain organizations over others who are quicker to adopt? Or was there a certain demographic willing to adopt, or a certain type of analyst core or groups? Was there a pattern to that you identified?
No, as far as any kind of generational notes or proclivities, like younger people are better at this, I have not found that not to be the case. I find it's more of a mindset. I've used this example, and this is a very old example. The top editor back in the day in Intellipedia was 72 years old. He had by far the most contributions. When I was teaching the open collaboration classes, I had brand new analysts that were in their 20s saying, "This is my page, don't edit it."
He wouldn't happen to be from the State Department, would he? I think I know that guy.
It's kind of a growth mindset, and I think that some folks that had some experience with it. The thing with Pathfinder is we specifically recruited people that were good at it, and we had a different hiring process, right? So we hired for the people that can function in an ambiguity and do this well. In the COVID case, people didn't have a choice. Some people that don't like working at home, right, or had never done this type of work were in this pool. So there was very uneven type of demographics. There were people that were really excited, like, look, I've been dying to work at home. The things have been overclassified, and I'm glad I'm here. There was that element, but then you also had folks that had zero experience, and everyone was in the pool. The thing that I think that helped a lot was when you're dispersed globally, you have to learn how to collaborate well within collaborative technologies, whether that's version control, sharing documents, chat systems. A lot of folks saw that real work and decent work could be done in that collaborative infrastructure. And I think before, many folks were doing a lot of email and a lot of more point-to-point type of communications. The more kind of platform-based technologies, if you will, where it's not point-to-point like email, like those collaborative tools that Intelink offers, and there's different versions that agencies have. I think having thousands and thousands of people having to figure that out very quickly of how to do virtual collaboration and do it well. And it's not as easy as people think, right? Being in there, it's not just, fire it up in the browser and go. It's when to use version control, when to blog something, when to share this document. It's what is appropriate to put in chat. Again, not just IC stuff, but Slack. Slack has caused a lot of stuff to go into Slack because it is so easy to use that organizations have had to say, hold on a second, don't put everything in a chat channel. From a knowledge management perspective, for discovery and search of content that has been generated, the people to find that again, if you don't have a strong search capability where all of that content is indexed by some sort of search engine, you have knowledge management problems. So if you put everything into a chat tool that's not searched well, you have knowledge discovery problems. So again, to the kind of what you pointed out earlier, this is not just IC specific stuff. There have been a lot of organizations that have used Slack, for example, way too much, and giant walls of text have gone into Slack that should have been put in the corporate wiki for more persistence should have been done. So it's when to use Slack, when to use version control, when to use it just takes time to do rather than gunning everything into email or chat services.
Yeah, there's layers of communication that make sense for certain circumstances out there. For the mediums have their purposes for how actionable something needs to be, and then once again, records management at the end of the day. No, I completely agree with you. That makes a lot of sense, and so this also is an interesting snapshot in time between lessons learned as you created or brought Intellipedia to the mix over 10 years ago. So in that time period, there's a whole set of services and technology that promoted a cultural need and innovation within the community. But what kinds of services out there right now exist in the unclassified realm that say, hey, if you all jump on board for using the unclassified realm, not just for doing your projects, this is the kind of benefits you'll see from today's technology? What do you find there's certain services that didn't exist over 10 years ago that would be of huge benefit now, that type of thing? I mean, you mentioned Slack, but I feel like that's just scratching the surface there.
Sure. As far as it depends on the work being done. But if you look at a patent researcher, a hedge fund researcher, a reporter, a journalist, an intelligence analyst, those are very similar kind of knowledge worker positions where your job is to generate content and insight. So it's not just always IC specific type of things. But let me talk about the ones that familiar with that I think that are beneficial for doing good research on the unclassified side. You're going to need some sort of very easy to use GIS system. I'm a huge fan of QGIS. That is the open source version of a good GIS system, incredibly powerful. There are YouTube videos for every plugin and every feature you can imagine to do kind of geospatial analysis. You're going to need some sort of storage, decent sized cloud storage. S3 buckets are good for that. Amazon, very simple storage that creates URLs against the data that's put in there. You're going to need coders need to be able to freely download what they need to download. So there has been some advantages there to write software against data and to scrape data. You need to be able to do that freely. So the GIS systems for on the imagery side, you can do quite a bit of imagery exploitation within a GIS and just view things manually. From a brute force perspective, to get an idea of what's going on, that's kind of very specific to the GEOINT business. Outside of that, again, there's those general collaborative technologies which accomplish a lot of work. A lot of the staff and administrative functions, and even a lot of the research is done through the exchange and the creation of unstructured text, and that seems to be the dominant driver. In many cases, there's deeper data analysis that needs to be done against things. But again, you need a pool of where to pool that data. So the access to as many structured databases that you can download and install to help with that parsing from a data science perspective to run Python or R against large volumes of data. To come up with statistical correlation is necessary, and that's on the more data-oriented side. But I think that the general collaborative tools cover down a lot of business that's transferable from not from IC, but from knowledge workers. I think you can do a lot just analyzing unstructured text, which seems to be it is the dominant way that knowledge is conveyed. Structured data is valuable, but you can do an awful lot. You don't have to be a data scientist to be able to do high quality open source research. A browser, in many cases, is what you need, and the key is just hustle. A perfect example is that Bellingcat is a website that's devoted towards open source research. And a lot of folks use that as an exemplar. The founder of the Bellingcat website, Elliot Higgins, was an unemployed Brit in early 2010. And what he could do was analyze a lot of YouTube videos manually about the conflict in Syria. And he taught himself these methodologies to look for anomalies in YouTube videos of the Syrian conflict, of the chlorine attacks, and formed a brand just through sheer grit and hustle, just by pounding the keyboard in a browser, going towards, looking at YouTube videos, knowing what social media feeds to follow, know what groups are doing the talking and creating the data. And back to what I was talking about with Pathfinder, what you're seeing now is you just have to be in this space. So kind of like graduate school, when you come in and you do a literature review, you got to get to know who's doing the writing in your area. Same thing here. You got to know who's tweeting what, who's making the videos, who's writing the papers, who's posting the data. And that just takes time through hustle, in many cases through a browser, to get good at. In the case of Bellingcat, they use all free tools, mostly Google Earth. Google Earth is an outstanding resource. So there's a feature in Google Earth called the historical timeline. So if you zoom into an area, generally Google does a good job of purchasing fairly recent imagery from European sensors, from US sensors. If you hit that little clock, in many cases there's coverage almost every 30 days, in some cases going back 10 years. And that's
I'll say that's the one feature that has prevented me from using the web version of Google Earth, is that historical timeline within that. I mean, that to me is, aside from a few other smaller features, is the one thing that I keep going for the hard client for every time.
Oh, it's fantastic. And as far as, drawing KMLs and annotating and then sharing that structured data, again, it's very easy to do. So in the GEOINT field, that's an outstanding tool to use as well. But that's what you need to use what's free and what's open source, what's available first. And there are very expensive systems that help with aggregation and curation and alerting of massive volumes of information, and those come with a fee. But in many cases, the data that are being fed into those systems, if you want to do it, you can go hit the open API. You can go right into the GUI yourself and do it brute force. And that's not cool to say in 2020, where we want to, say we want artificial intelligence and machine learning to do everything. I haven't found a lot of those kind of statements or systems to have been. They're not there yet. I'm fairly skeptical again of a lot of the AI and ML investments. I've seen a lot of them underperform substantially, and I think you need a lot of people in this space pounding the keyboard. If you're going to teach the computer, in many cases, your folks are going to have to condition that data, and if they do that to teach the computer, the output better be worth the time of just teaching the computer to do something. And so,
regardless of the performance, there, it's also about usability, and a lot of these things aren't user friendly on the other side. They have to output something that's user friendly. They have to be user friendly. They also have to integrate within existing workflows. So you might have some set algorithms out there, aside from how good the performance is, and how trusting they are. They haven't. It's like getting a data scientist to talk to an analyst, and the two need to be met in the middle somewhere, and those connections haven't been formalized. They haven't been operationalized. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for.
I think that's a good term. And look, I'm not approaching this from some sort of working class hero. This robot will never take my job perspective. I love technology. I follow it, and I love this stuff. I just haven't seen a lot of the systems that I have evaluated or I've been a part of. Some of them have massively underperformed. And where brute force of 20 people was more efficient and more effective than the ML solution that was offered. Now, there's been some boutique cases where it has been successful, but I think that when it comes to this stuff, there's so much pamphlet literature and type of salesy type of stuff that's out there that when you really pound the keyboard, when they come into the organization, you need to tune those, and they need to be given a fair shake for sure. And again, I've seen some fantastic technology that has automated core business and reduced hundreds and thousands of hours of time. But in general, hey, we need to do some machine learning on this. You got to go, okay, hold on. Is this worth it? And can this be done even more effectively through brute force? And I have found sometimes that is the case through just grit and a browser. You don't necessarily need to have all of that. So it's what technology is appropriate. So if you're a 5-person insurance company that has 200 clients, you don't need a Hadoop cluster. So it's just technology is very, very trendy, and it's, hey, if you're not in Node.js, you're not doing it right and all that stuff. But you got to focus on what works, and then if you do make that upgrade, are the results clear?
That makes total sense. And I want to rope it back into a question we just received from the audience, by the way. Sure. So people are watching. What do you think will cause people to start viewing the unclassified side as co-equal? So you mentioned being co-equal before, and you talked about being vested in the unclassified with projects, with new projects. But how do you get them to buy into this?
So I'll start with a couple very practical things and then just kind of draw this out. Useful content is useful content no matter what domain it's on. So what's going to happen if that flagship work comes down or start to being created, that's going to have to be marketed to customers. So now we're in a kind of a better position that there are thousands of email distros on the unclassified side that we didn't have 3 months ago. So a lot of folks that wanted to get out the message to other analysts in the community, other users, everything was done on the high side. Now you have massive email distros that have been created. You have those chat channels I was telling you about with hundreds and hundreds of people in them now. So we have an opportunity when we get to that part. Now, right now there's data familiarization, getting comfortable with the space, and kind of research kind of that's going on. And there has been work that has been done official, but it's been moved up. So in my opinion, that needs to stay down low, and we have to create that market. So when the marketing time comes to who are the end customers of it, I believe that it will be successful, because if you put high quality information who's not going to read it? By saying I'm not going to look at that because it's not on an air gap system. So I think marketing and getting out to other organizations. I have a talk at the Treasury Department next week. It's just to get the message out that this will be coming. This is where we plan on putting it, and we like your feedback there on the low side. So to make it stick, we're going to have to do it and have to create it and not just say, hey, let's move this up to the other system, is to keep it low and then correlate the two if we need to. And then a lot of marketing work is going to have to take place to create that market.
Excellent question from the audience, and thank you for answering that. And I also want to reflect on the title of this episode, which is Will COVID Lessons Learned Stick? How do you feel based off of what's currently going on, the half-life or continued operations of the adoption going on beyond the current effort?
Again, there's a lot of energy now, and I hope as reconstitution starts, whatever that means to the federal entity or even the private entity, is that people just guard against going back to default behavior. And I think that, again, not just esoteric intelligence, NGA-specific things, but I think this is shown in cases of a lot of knowledge workers that just going to the office 5 days a week, in many cases, that was a ritual that wasn't that beneficial. Face-to-face and small team collaboration is not going to be replaced even by video in some cases. And I'm not saying that everything can be done in video and version control tools and chat tools forever. But I think that people are going to have to put kind of promises in place to not go back to default behavior. And if that's, I'm going to do this 3 days a week and keep doing this, and particularly on managers. If the manager is continuing to telework and continuing to create value on the unclassified side, then I think outside of the official part, which I think we need to get to, that'll help it stick, rather than when reconstitution starts, everyone runs back in and then we forget what was done over the last 5 months. So I think that there's conversations now of that accordion file, if you will. How high can that go? And in certain units, particularly with software developers, that can go as high as full time. There's certain missions that may not be able to do it, but even those, just doing general research, reading academic literature on your account, that's real work. And if let's just say that you have a 24/7 operations person that necessarily can't stay at home a lot, but they can do a couple of days. So even the most extreme cases, there are a couple of days that can be done. But I think this is, again, what I'm calling the accordion file, is we're not going to be able to say to thousands of employees to do 2 days a week no matter what. It's going to be, hey, if it can go as high as 5, cool. If it go to 3, fine. So I don't think there's a set thing. So I think, knowing where that accordion file is and then making a commitment to stick with it and guard against kind of default behavior kind of on overdrive, I think is the key. And again, this is not just the government. I have colleagues that are in the private sector that have been going to an office and they're now just going, well, the company's going to write off the building. They don't really need that much space anymore. So I think there's it's not just a government conversation. I know that you have the Twitters and the more tech jobs that are saying you could stay at home for years. That's not everyone, but if you are generating software, if you are in the knowledge economy and a knowledge worker that works a lot with the creation of software or the use of software, when you see those declarations from the Twitters, from the Facebooks, from the Googles that are saying, kind of stay home if you'd like, I think that's cool. But those are kind of outliers. But I think it's important that they're making those statements as well.
Well, you just got into, the last couple of things you talked about, literally got into a question somebody else just asked, and I think you spurred it a little bit. And as the workforce is at home, at least a good portion of them is right now, from the government and different analysts, and they're doing unclassified work, at least the best they can. And they're discovering that this does work. And we can can make this happen. We don't have to go back to the office. What do you see the future? Maybe not this year, but what do you see the potential future of big government spaces, big government headquarters buildings? Do you see it, especially as the St. Louis NGA buildings being constructed, trying to promote a huge portion of the space towards unclassified work? But does it make sense to have a committed space or have something more disparate and folks working at home and doing the same thing?
Yeah, with the Pathfinder lessons learned, we handed those over to the Army Corps of Engineers, and there was an impact on creating more unclassified and Wi-Fi enabled spaces for that new facility in St. Louis. So that was really cool to be a part of very, very early on in Pathfinder. One of our recommendations was, hey, I don't think we need this much SCIF space. And it was, that things that were set in motion in 2003 were set in motion in 2003. I think the question you have to ask is, 2020 and beyond, from a GEOINT perspective, you don't necessarily need that much SCIF space. And I would like the percentages to be higher. I've heard the numbers at 20% and things. I think it should be higher. That's Chris Rasmussen's opinion. But I think that we can do, and again, I think all three letters will go through this. And NGA is just kind of first. So I think that less SCIF space is going to be part of the new normal moving forward. And you got to start someplace. And if that's 20%, that's awesome. I just think it should go up a little higher. I don't have a magic number, whether it's half SCIF, half unclassified, but I think it'll increase. But even outside of the secure facilities, I think that, the GSAs, the interior departments, and even groups that are not, have to really, really ask, do we need this? There are services where you can rent office space on demand that are popular, that are out there. I think that a lot of the assumptions about work and how work gets done has been brought into question, and for good. And I'm glad from this situation. I think there was a lot of paternalism built into the work system in the United States, not just the government. I think that, again, I have family and colleagues that their companies are saying, yeah, you're doing a great job. We don't really, you don't have to drive out here 50 miles every day anymore. And that's been great to hear in any situation with work-life balance and things that are very, very important. I'm glad this is happening. But I think that
help prove the productivity out and prove that this is working. Someone just asked from the audience here, has there been any research on productivity and efficiency to work outside the office? And I know there's been a ton of studies from an industry perspective, but based off of, a lot of government policies, based off of either per diem or travel rates can maybe affect things. And those things haven't quite changed yet. But how are metrics recorded based off of best practice that you've seen, especially with Pathfinder, and how have you recorded those metrics?
Yeah, as far as does this work? And there are, metrics of number of hours logged in here, the number of data sources looked at, the number of outputs here. But I'm going to take a step back of people. I don't think that people change their position based upon studies and data. They change their position based on stories and what has happened to them. And when we get into this, who can cite the most authoritative study stuff? I know that's great. And there's a million, as you mentioned, there's a million telework studies out there. There's the Yahoo case. There's been studies by Rand. There have been so many. And until it happens to you or your unit, I think that the change of behavior is people know when they're efficient, when they're valued, and when the output that they're generating is of value and getting feedback. And when that happens at the personal level, not through some 600-page PDF report, that's when behavior changes. So you can look at the Yahoo cases and things like that, where telework was suspended to eat and breathe Yahoo and what that did, and then people will go, well, I don't work at Yahoo, I work over here, so it doesn't transfer direct. So I think that the behavior change doesn't come through studies. Behavior change comes through doing it and seeing it firsthand. So when I do these lunch sessions, I do with analysts and in divisions. I just did one last week. Is the feedback that I got was, you speak in just not corporate jargon. This is plain language with very specific examples of what you look like from the outside from web metrics. This is you in a browser. This is what you look like. A lot of folks don't know that. And I just gave very practical examples of cases over and over again to show that this is how you can do this safely. Here's the questions to ask. Here's the security measures that you can take. So I think that studies are valuable. I'm not saying don't do the Uber study. I just haven't seen behavior change that people that they get the PDF file and go, you know what? I'm going to start teleworking now because this PDF is just fantastic.
No, and I think people are always looking for those outlier reasons of these nefarious individuals are obviously take advantage of the system. And, and I think industry's proven, then you go after those individuals and then you see if everything still works fine, and for the most part, it does.
It does. And that was to the edge cases again, those are edge cases and deal with that. But most workers, knowledge workers or any workers, want to do a good job. In many cases, do a good job. And this is Chris Rasmussen's view. I'm not a huge earn trust guy. You give it. And I'm a very kind of flat give trust person. And I write the questions on the wall. Here's the team. There's the developers. There's the data scientist. There's the analyst. Here are the tools. Step away and just help them succeed. And just flattening out. We've talked about this for a long time of what that means to flatten an organization out. And when you jump into these collaborative tools and everyone's in the same bucket. And of course, not everyone is equal. But when you're in these collaborative systems, your reputation online as a worker within that intranet, it's open. It's pretty flat. And you can have people that have stepped up and been emergent leaders in that environment that didn't necessarily have departmental rank. So I think that these tools, the collaborative tools that people are using in telework, help flatten out a bit. And people see that. And I think that's been a good thing to have a forcing function to kind of look at some flattening activities that organizations needed to take. And again, not just the government. Again, there's private sector analogies here at banks and insurance companies. It's not just the government.
That's a great answer, and I think so. We have about a few more minutes left, but we do have another question. I think is a kind of interesting one here. Do you think that working in the unclassified space and the movement towards moving the unclassified space will help in preventing overclassification of products and services?
Yeah, and again, when you're in this space, again, it's a forcing function. You have to make it exist on the low side, right? Before, and many folks they did all of their work on an air gap system, and overclassification is not new. It tracks back decades, and in fact, there's a case of the museum in Tehran of the raid in the 70s. The orders for the motor pool were classified secret no foreign. And those motor parts were a classified document. So this is not anything new. But the reason that it exists is there's no incentive for disincentive for overclassification, right? You side on the air of caution. Now, if people are at home and have to work on the low side, you have to think differently and really ask tough questions about what makes this inherently classified. And I think that Pathfinder helped with the NGA is interested in X question. It wasn't just X. It was what is the behavior change? Also, people have to look at this aggregation idea. You really have to ask when you add parts. And in my opinion, there's kind of this belief that the aggregation of information leads to higher order classification. I haven't found that to be true in a GEOINT sense. The more unclassified data points there are, the more unclassified it becomes, not the other way around. So again, you have to ask, when you're mushing this together, is it forming higher order knowledge? And is that worth trade secret worthy protection? And you look at the methodologies that are used, you look at the aggregation of the sources, and if the answer is yes, there is some black box type of trade secret Pepsi recipe needs to be locked up in the basement things, then protect those. but not just you're adding stuff. So by default, it needs to go higher. You have to ask.
I could see that mindset thinking back in the 90s or even in the 80s when you added layers, it actually required a certain level of not just expertise, but access through levels on the unclass that normal people wouldn't be able to obtain. And nowadays, it's information is everywhere. The access is everywhere. So it's harder to make that argument now more than ever.
Yeah, and being in the space again, and people thought that when I did Pathfinder, and I had a terrible relationship with security. They're the biggest fans because we were very deliberate. This creates better security of what to protect because you cannot protect everything equally, and you have to triage and rank things. So this is better security, knowing what to really protect. There's that old quote from, I think it's McBundy George, that was a national security advisor for President Kennedy. And he said, if you protect diamonds and toothbrushes with the same level of zeal, you're going to protect more toothbrushes and lose more diamonds. You really have to ask, what are you protecting? And when you're in this space every day, and you know what state of the art is, you know what academic departments are doing, you know what the financial industry is doing with data, you have a better sense of saying, this is unique. This is worth protecting. So I think that this is driving a lot of those questions. And I think based upon 4 months for folks that have never done this before, thrust in this space, I think the grade has been pretty good across the board. I think people have been very adaptive. So I'm optimistic. I think certain conditions need to happen. And I have one more world according to Chris point that I like to throw out there that I think that will make it stick. But I'm proud of NGA. The kind of the antecedent work that it had with Pathfinder, with the commercialization of GEOINT, kind of what are we going to do things, helped a lot when COVID hit. So NGA was kind of a little bit ahead of other organizations when that happened. But before I do my last point, I'll see if there's any more questions in the chat.
I think we're good there. No questions that I can see.
Yeah, so this is the world according to Chris. And in fact, all of this is the world according to Chris. I should have started out with my Simpsons lawyer voice that these are my views, not the organization's views. But what I think that where investment should be made on the IC side and to try to do this is to really look into public trust cleared workers. So rather than a security clearance, which is an SF-86 form and investigation, is for the unclassified space, look into SF-85 investigations and clearances, which are basically a public trust clearance. If we were to do that and have a permanent group that was not cleared, they would have to stay at home. They would have to collaborate in those unclassified spaces. And the opportunity is that we can leave people that don't want to move to SCIF centers, which are DC, Tampa, Denver. They can stay in Montana if they have a good connection and generate code, generate unclassified research, generate GIS data from home with a public trust clearance or from an unclassified collaborative space someplace. So I've put this in the suggestions jar. Again, this is not the agency's position. This is Chris's idea. But I think that organizations, particularly that have clearances, can look into why do we even need to clear everybody by default, and to look into running just uncleared positions. This is a question that tracks back that Karen and I were in this panel, or she was in the audience.
Well, let me add to that real quick. I think you just opened the door to a not just a market gap, but a job gap that exists out there. And let me be more specific. Over the last couple of years, I've had a lot of friends, connections in the military who, they work in the classified realm. They work in the intelligence spaces. They work in GEOINT, but they never reach the TSSCI level. They may leave the military, even in the Army. This is notorious with the Army, actually, that they leave the Army intel with a secret clearance, and they can no longer get any type of good job because they don't have TSSCI. And there's thousands of people in there who are forced to leave the intelligence career fields because it's too much of a hardship to get the clearances back. And so they're having a hard time even they want to apply, but they can't. They don't have an existing clearance. So why not use these individuals who have just as much experience, if not more, in certain areas of expertise, especially when it comes to military tactical intelligence, and find unclassified work for them. If we're worried that there isn't a workforce out there that exists who we can leverage, I think there's a huge market gap for that right there.
Yeah, so do I. And again, there are certain folks that are don't want to do this work forever. And again, in Pathfinder, we recruited for that personality type and that skill set. But I think there is a massive untapped market of talent in the uncleared space that we can really maximize if we just think a little bit differently. And that's the key, is just question the assumptions. Why are we doing this again? Why do I have to be in the office? Why can't we do it here? Those are going to be key to guards of again, biases when you're doing analytic training. Everyone has bias, but you have to come up with exercises to draw down that bias. And, here, when you get into just cruise control mode, I think making questioning those assumptions along the way will go a long way. And I think that the public trust thing will be great. And not just on the government employee side. That's where it needs to happen. And we have some folks that are on the contract side that do this. But this was about 5 years ago, and Karen and I I think she was on the panel, but we were in Florida, and somebody got up and said, I've been waiting for my clearance. I have all these services, and I'm just waiting for my clearance. And me being in space, I was on the panel for something else. But I was just like, what are you selling? And what he described to me, I'm like, why do you need a clearance at all? It was just kind of this assumption that this was the ticket to check to get there. I think that if public trust positions to sell unclassified services are sufficient to workers at home or workers in uncleared spaces, I think that that's a huge opportunity. So we don't have to necessarily clear all of the contractors to do support work by default to enter the facility.
Makes total sense. I want to thank you, Chris, for coming onto the show with us and presenting your knowledge and best practices. I know a lot of folks will be interested to hear what you have to say. This has been the topic, will COVID lessons learned stick? But even more than that, talking about work in the unclassified realm, what agencies and specifically NGA has learned, what Chris has learned to bring that workforce forward into, I guess you could say the 21st century, right? So thank you for joining us. And this is Adam Simmons with the Project Geospatial Frontier Virtual Technology Fair, signing off. Thank you very much, everybody.